Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of The Shadow Side with Safrianna. It is wild to do 2 episodes of the same show in a single day, but that is what the double debut day is all about, is just double dipping. So, welcome. I am here tonight to talk about Daddy's Girl, my poetry book that just came out today, and to talk about the shadow of my father a little bit with this. And in the back of this book, I'm the kind of author that or the kind of reader really. I love to read about the authors that um, whose work I'm consuming, whether that be fiction, nonfiction, etc. I just like to know them as a person. And so I asked my audience, my people on my socials and whatnot, if they had any questions for the book, and some questions got submitted. So I did end up answering them in the book, and I wanted to share those today. But if you happen to catch this live or you are tuning into the replay and there's a question I didn't answer that you are curious about, by all means, let me know. I am so happy to be literally an open book and just explore whatever I can. And this new shadow side segment is really about talking about the difficult things. And so this book in general is a difficult thing. So we're going to get into that. But just in case this is your first time encountering me, I am Safrianna Luna. I am the queer spirit guide. I'm a licensed trauma therapist, a internationally best-selling author, and a speaker. And I'm just here to hopefully change our relationship with generational trauma and enter a new collective period of compassion and communal healing and unity and harmony, and not what we see so much in the world these days. So I did share earlier the preface of this book where I really get into the bigger picture of why I thought it was important to share this book at this point in time. And like I said, tonight I'm going to read some of the questions and just answer whatever else comes up. So let's just dive in and anchor into my topic, which of course was the shadow of my father. So I went into my own business in 2021 after being into very traditional careers. And this was sort of me exploring my relationship with the masculine principles, right? If we think about the divine masculine for a moment, I want to remove all sense of gender from it for a moment. Divine masculine principles are about structure, they're about support, they are about care, they are about compassion. They're about creating a runway in which we can flow, really. And my relationship with my divine masculine was all out of whack. The structure was overgiving, it was overly rigid, it was suffocating, it was burning me out, right? And these are things that aren't healthy, but are often given a thumbs up from society. Nice to see you, Red. So, um, you know, this out of balance relationship that we have with the masculine, with structure, with doing energy, with taking action is very out of balance. And I did explore some of that in my first poetry book, A Woman's Work. But Daddy's Girl is really getting into where that came from. And it came from, in my life, my father, the lessons that I learned from my father. And I speak to this in many of the poems in this book, but there's an early poem called Life Lessons. And my dad taught me that money was the most important thing we needed to have. If we didn't have money, we were in trouble. He taught me to somehow put everyone else first at the expense of myself, at the expense of himself, right? This is what he lived by, but then not really have anything left to show up for the people who really needed him or me. Um, that promises are just made up, that queer identities aren't real, that secret keeping is normal. Like, I got all of these negative lessons. Yes, this these untangling the patriarchy pieces is what this book is all about. Because my father was very wrapped up in the patriarchy. He was very wrapped up in sexism and very wrapped up in overgiving of himself. You know, the man sacrificing himself at work to provide. Like, that's not what we want either. It's He was so out of balance and he never got to recover from that. He died in his very early 60s. Like, he didn't get much of a life at the end of the day because his whole adult life was spent working and sacrificing himself to try and make ends meet so that his family could survive, and still perpetuating the cycle of generational trauma, right? The generational trauma that so many of us face is ultimately also locked into capitalism and poverty and all kinds of other socioeconomic, religious structures. It's kind of everywhere. And so that's why I'm like, we have to talk about it. We need to talk about these things. We need to shine a light into these shadows so that something new can be made. For as long as we continue to stay silent about these very painful realities that our relatives, our parents, even our children are still facing today, then we can't change anything. And I am definitely, I've known a lot of people who are like, well, it was this way for me, so it should be this way for you too. I'm just going to pass on my junk to you because, it's a rite of passage. We all have to go through it. I don't believe in that. I believe in creating better, and every experience that we have leading us towards creating better experiences for other people to avoid some of the pitfalls and pains that so many of us go through. So that's all I'll say on that for now. If other stuff comes in, I'll switch to that, but I'm going to switch over into the book and just start with the first question that was submitted, which was, what was creating Daddy's Girl like? So I wrote, first off, this book was an anomaly. Daddy's Girl is the first book I've ever written with a name so clear from the start. Normally, I waffle on names for a while until suddenly a title clicks into place, or I give up and go with the best mashup of words I sort of like. But as soon as I sat down to scribble the first poem of this volume, the name had already become a solid foundation. Writing Daddy's Girl happened over 3 stages spread over a few years. Number 1, the first drafts between March and August of 2021. 2, revisions and developmental feedback and editing with my poetry editor, Robin Kinzer, in November of 2022. And finally, 3, implementing Robin's feedback and writing 32 new poems in August and September of 2024. This book was over 3 years in the making because of how much care, attention, and processing needed to go into each piece. I'll talk a little bit about that. Like my debut poetry book, A Woman's Work, I designed Daddy's Girl completely by hand, the cover, the interior design, and collaborating during every step of the editing process. These poetry collections are like sacred siblings, exploring my out-of-alignment relationship with womanhood and then masculine energy through the lens of my earthly father. They are complementary works that share bits and pieces of my story, enough that one could piece together my lore in snapshot bits and pieces. Seeing how they both come together as a matched set is honestly so cool. They are unique glimpses of specific parts of my larger life. So yeah, this book was, again, this is the pre-sale. I have not gotten my physical copies in yet, but this is the not for resale proof. So there are minor changes on this cover, but it's got my 8th grade picture on the back. Like, it's so personal. This literally could have been a scrapbook that I made when I was a kid. And so there was just a lot of inner child healing that went into this project in a way that A Woman's Work touched on, but this really went deeply into, because so much of my childhood was wound up in my relationship with my father. And this book gets to kind of wrap that up and put a bow on it and say thank you to all that it was. So creating this really cleared up a lot for me and just let me release a lot of that, divine masculine imbalance that I had, that toxic structure, that out of balance relationship, to bring it into something that is completely unique to me and my energy balance and what my relationship with that principle or that energy is meant to be. So the next question that was submitted was, what did you notice as you were writing Daddy's Girl, and how did this book help you transform? So earlier this year, 2024, I released a woman's work, which cracked me open rather like an egg into a frying pan. So, holy fuck, I had done the thing. I had shared so much of my story in as authentic and soul led a way as possible. And somehow, without landing it, or without aiming for it, I landed the number one new release in both LGBTQ poetry and contemporary poetry. And it was just such a wild day, which, for the record, as of me going live right here, I'm the number one new release in LGBTQ poetry again. So, super pumped about that. And so I immediately took a sabbatical after releasing that book. And I integrated all of my up leveling that had happened as a result of unveiling my voice and truth so powerfully. Because of that experience, I felt fully committed to seeing Daddy's Girl through, as painful as I knew it would be. And oh my gosh, it was talk about the shadow. It was a shadow chapter. Thank you, Red. In my father's dying days of 2021, all of my childhood trauma resurfaced. As I was swept into being the family savior yet again, I was simultaneously experiencing a people pleaser era so insidious because of how blind I was to it. I was barreling myself towards permanent disability and irreversible chronic illness. Being a hashtag daddy's girl was once an important part of my identity, but at this stage I started to realize it was no longer a badge of honor. It was a mantle of martyrdom. It was only about 2 years after my own fibromyalgia diagnosis, and I was in more pain than ever when I got the call about Dad's worsening diagnosis. He shared with me his nebulous plans about his estate, revealing that my sister and stepmother would not be cared for once he was gone. And before I knew it, dissociated and codependent, I found my way back to the den of depression and despair that was my teenage home. From there, so basically after I got back from New York and sat down to breathe, I began writing poems about my grief and anger. Poems like Clatter of Voices, Scapegoat, Grief in My Defense, and all the poems surrounding his death and estate. I processed my relationship with my stepmother in poems like Dear Evil Stepmother, The Vegan Trinity, Stepmonster, and Obituary, all written later in 2021 after my dad had already passed and the shit show that was his estate. In the end, my stepmother's continued verbal abuse and constant nagging for me to miraculously do what dad had failed to do led me to draw boundaries. And basically, I handed his affairs back over to the state because neither of my mother figures volunteered to take over it when I had said I was finished. So I put the book on a breather before working with Robin Kinzer on editing the poems that I'd already done, and her feedback was wonderful. We did a live workshop session that lasted many hours where we refined some of the original poems, the most unrecognizable now being roller coasters and water slides, which is so much stronger for it. Thank you. And she also shared the inspiration that eventually led me to doing extensive rewrites for this 2024 writing stint, bringing in even more of my flaws and exploring my relationship with my family. So picking the draft back up to edit in 2024 brought up all the old familiar swell of feelings, bobbing right back up to the surface. But this time I wasn't in the middle of the swirling chaos. I was standing a few years later, years filled with more healing, unpacking my codependency, couples therapy, art therapy, growing a business, life coaching, and learning my biological number, all which changed things again and again, on top of some major spiritual upgrades. So this time I was able to see the wisdom in the poems. I saw the gifts. And as I wrote new content, I was mainly inputting happier poems, fresher perspectives on myself, my family, and my partnerships. Poems like In the Space Lab, Papa and the Cows, Sky Fathers, Unlimited Pancakes, The Long Ride Home, and To Be Contained in His Arms were all tender reflections of how stable my life is now. In 2021 and even the years prior, there was a constant quake of new trauma and triggers because I still couldn't draw boundaries or hold my own against elders' pressures. Today, I am an immovable statue if I truly don't want to do something. It's a night and day kind of difference that can only be gained by looking our shame, fear, disappointment, doubt, and dread directly in the eyes, smiling and choosing to love it all. So, oh, yeah, this book brought up a lot, and it really, I've been doing shadow work for years now, and I teach shadow work. And one of the most important things I teach in shadow work is the light and shadow flow. It's the infinity figure, and we can orient it in any direction. It can be going up and down or left and right. It does not matter. It is the infinity flow. And from one side into the other, the light and the dark meet, they connect, they flow in and out of one another. And the center point where they connect is the point of awareness. And many of us spend a lot of our times just looping or rocking back and forth in a small segment of the shadow, usually unconscious that we are suffering, that we are literally dragging ourselves down into the depths of our despair. And so there's so much more empowerment and joy and levity that can come from choosing to just ride with it, ride into the shadows fully, knowing that that momentum is going to swing us up and out and back, and that it's not something we need to flee from, that we need to run away from and need to avoid. And so that is, that leads me right into the next question, which was submitted, which is, how did you turn the trauma you experienced into a triumph through your healing work on yourself? So I really saw this question like the opening of the Powerpuff Girls, where they're like, sugar, spice, and everything nice. These are the elements, blah, blah, blah. So I said authenticity, self-expression, healing work, both shadow and light work. These are a few of the elements that helped me move towards embodiment and my ability to speak and stand in my truth. The journey here was not a quick one, and it took a lot of self-development and hard work. I've always been a compassionate person, and I'm highly sensitive to both energy and emotion, feeling the ripples and waves of the earth herself and my fellow beings living here. My purpose is to be in harmony and balance with the world. I believe strongly in unity and oneness. As a child, I was the kind of person who would always see the black sheep and make sure that they were okay, and had a friend in me, at least. I repaired rifts and mediated conflicts wherever I could. I quickly learned to caretake others, and thus became the parentified child. I felt constantly torn between my mother and father. Being like my mother was not seen as a good thing by anyone except my mother, and she pushed me to be more like her than myself. So in many ways, it was easy to cling to my father as a role model, an example of what I was looking for in a partner too. He was somewhat hands-off, but encouraged me to be me in the ways that mom was less enthusiastic about. He supported me in consuming media I enjoyed, like anime, and encouraged me to dress in the goth fashion that I liked. I think I went goth before he did, but it was a fun period in the good days when we twinned often, wearing similar styles and even matching Hot Topic looks. During my golden years with my father, mostly when I was 13 to 15, I was proud to be the child he could connect with. Then everything changed. I represent an unfortunate statistic as a bisexual girl who was abused in childhood and went on to repeat the cycle in adult relationships. My youth was rife with pain and trauma and I was abused not by just one male parental figure, but by peers and a friend's brother. While I didn't write a whole poem about it in this collection, my father not only didn't believe me about my sexual abuse, but also blamed me for allowing myself to be sexually assaulted by a peer. This is reflected in the poem She's Got Daddy Issues. This denial of abuse crushed me, perhaps more than anything, for a long time. It was not until I was 30 that I escaped the constant threat of sexual violence. Authenticity was hard to come by when I was constantly in fear and highly codependent. Oh my gosh, I confused my father with my own goth phase. He would roll his eyes. My mother was horrified. I'm glad I'm not alone in the goth phase. And yeah, that tracks. Throughout those challenging times, I always had tools to self-express: writing fiction and poetry, creating works of art, exploring myself in other forms in video games and online forums. While those means of sharing my innermost landscapes were wonderful, it still didn't allow me to speak myself in full. I held myself back until my mid-30s, when I finally began to write my truth and share feelings and thoughts openly without fear getting in the way. Writing about my real experiences felt dangerous and impossible even years after I had accessed self-love for the first time. It has been a steady unfolding back into self-expression since then, this book being proof of that. While I've had extremely low cycles in my life and long patches of rock bottom, I've also come back to believing in myself and my dreams. I felt in my core that things could be better for me and everyone else too, even at times where all I knew was suffering. The glimmer in my heart of hope always shone brighter than anything else, drawing me forward like a beacon. Even when I tried to exit this ride, several attempts to take my own life woven into my adolescent teen years, my body always knew how to cleanse, purify, and reject the toxins within me, not letting it take its hold for long. In many ways, I resonate with the phoenix. I've been told by intuitive friends and professionals that my chart placements and various blueprints are quite that of the phoenix, and that I get to teach other people how to rise in the same way and to use their ashes as a fertile ground from which they are to be reborn. It's a metal AF mantle and description, honestly, but as a shadow alchemist and a trauma worker, I can't help but see the beauty and the transformation and magic that comes out of pain. That's where shadow and light work come in. As my resources and inner capacity grew, so does my toolkit. I've written a ton about it elsewhere, and I'm not going to even get into reading this here, but basically, I have tried it all and figured out what worked for me so that I could do the shadow and light healing necessary to land where I am today. But my core practice today includes daily journaling, card pulling, dancing, and using herbal tea and cacao and plant medicines to balance my energy in the ways that I need and be supportive and harmonious with my system. I have overcome my trauma to this point to really sink into self awareness so that I can stand here and write a book about trauma and healing and speak out loud about it and let myself do that. The phoenix is a type of earth entity, by the way. I'm laughing with joy you found this connection. I love that. It makes sense. It makes sense. This being reborn from the ashes is a thing I know very, very well. And, you know, this story, this question of like, how did you turn your trauma into triumph? It's if I didn't allow myself to heal, if I didn't allow myself to express, if I didn't allow myself to step into my fullness and to my blueprint, I wouldn't be able to have the impact that I'm here to have. And I know I want to have my impact. And so I do it scared and I show up again and again and again and again and again. And I do it scared again and again and again to show myself and others that I can keep doing it. And the next question in the that I was asked is how does your experience impact your work as a healer and how you guide others? And, I'll just say to that, like when I work with people, people find me that have gone through such similar things. They can feel that resonance with me and they know that I've already tripped and fallen on my face. And because I've tripped and fallen on my face and I've taken ownership and I've done the deeper work and I've kept going with it, there's the possibility that I can hold their hand a little bit and run with them through the forest and point out the spots where, maybe there is this place you're going to trip over here and maybe you want to leap over that or maybe you want to avoid that. And I wouldn't know what to avoid. I wouldn't know what codependency really deeply looks like. I wouldn't know what the suffering inside what's supposed to be a healthy, happy relationship looks like without the experience. And it's not just me. This is such a pervasive and worldwide problem, generational trauma, relational trauma, pain between parents and children, and just continuing to pass it on. And so if I didn't have these experiences, I wouldn't know how to speak on them and help other people move through them. So I don't love it, right? I don't love that any of us have these experiences, but I am glad that we're not alone, and I'm glad that I get to teach people to flow with the shadow and the light now and not be so afraid of it. I just saw that little fluffy tail go by. So the last question that was submitted was what drives you to put your author identity first at this stage? And it ultimately comes down to impact. I was actually speaking at a event the other day in person on domestic violence and being a survivor and what people need to know. And it really drove home speaking the exact reason that I'm writing now and that my author identity is the most important thing for me, which is that, again, the world is on fire, not in a good way. Generational trauma is pervasive. So many of us are in pain. So many of us are suffering. And I write about this in here. There's sexism, there is judgment, there is racism, there is religious phobia, there is rampant addiction, there is so much violence, there's mass gun crime, there is genocide, there's all this pain in the world right now. And for as long as we just stay quiet about it, nothing changes. So I am here to, I'll say it, to make as big of a fuss about these things as I can and say, like, we need to look at this. We need to stop the pervasive pattern of generational trauma and then religious trauma and cultural wars and all of this stuff, this us versus them mentality. We need to stop it. And so that is ultimately what drives my author identity at this point, is getting my words into the hands of more people to have a wider reach and a bigger impact than sitting in the therapy room where I can impact one person at a time, which is tremendous impact, especially with the work that I'm doing now outside of the therapy room, where I can impact people in even bigger ways and systems in even bigger ways. But yes, we have to claim our voice. We have to claim our power. We have to not shut up. That is what this book is about. I don't. I've written so many poems at this point. I literally don't remember if it is in this book or in a woman's work. But there's a line that says something to the effect of, when you're told to be silent, like, that's when you need to be the loudest. And yes, make a fuss, beat the drum, unwind the bullshit. Let's change the world. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And this collection, just a fun few little things about it. There is a soundtrack for this collection as well. I'm actually going to put that in the chat. So if you want to check out the soundtrack, you can literally go here. It is tinyurl.com/DG soundtrack, and you can listen to the songs. And I can't make this stuff up. I put the soundtrack together and then I happened to look at it and it was an hour and 11 minutes long. And I'm like, okay, got you. And if you get the paper copy of the book, page 111 in the book is very, we'll just say, striking. So the book, if you are interested in the book itself, I highly recommend, if you are able to of course, get the paperback. It's laid out more properly in paperback and you get the full spread images in here. I'll just give a little sneaky peek here. It is very much a vulnerable volume, but I'm so proud of the book on the whole, and it is available on Amazon right now. You can get it at tinyurl.com/DG poems, or go search for it on Amazon. Of course, it's all over my socials right now, but this book is a testament to the shadow of people not wanting you to do something and you do it anyway for you, that it's not about them. I had many people say, kind of question, and I'll just say that the people that were questioning it were of an older generation who have that generational trauma of, we keep the secrets, we hold the skeletons in the closet, we protect our family at all costs. My writing and sharing my words is never to put any person on blast. And I don't out my family. Most of the people that I talk about in this book are passed on at this point. But anyone that's still alive is either involved in my life in a way or chooses to involve themselves in my life because I have boundaries. So when people were coming to me and saying, like, we don't think you should, are you sure you want to publish this book? Are you sure it's a good idea to share some of these things? What would your family feel, or what would your dad feel? Well, here's what I know. My dad has passed on. And I believe that when people pass on, all their egoic stuff kind of evaporates. And I don't think he cares anymore. I think that he is happy that I am breaking free of the generational curses that were in this family and that I'm not being silent anymore because he was. He did not get to break that pattern. And so I'm doing that, for me and for my family and for all of the other men, women, children, people in the world who feel like they have to be silent. That is what this book is about, is breaking that silence and staying in the power. Yeah. Secrets are never good. I love this. Open all the windows, clear all the shadows. We cannot heal if we keep the secrets in the dark. Thank you. Yeah. And that's exactly right. You're healing backward and forward is what was just shared. And yeah, I believe that when we heal ourselves, we're healing, generations past and generations forward, whether we ourselves are having children or not. We are weaving new energy into the earth. We are making new energies possible for the collective. We are clearing these toxic and outdated emotions, and we're just coming into a new way of being. So, I hope you will consider checking out the book or just supporting, cheering on however you can. I am here, like I said, to move through generational traumas and wounds and bring a new energy to the world. So that is why I continue to write. And I'm so excited because now that I have done this thing and written this book and cleared up the energy of this because it's been, kind of being held for 3 years now. I am so excited to enter the next chapter of life, which looks like writing more fiction, more science fiction, more fantasy, more of that like deep, um, contemplative through themes, sharing life lessons through characters kind of work. And, not having like it's been a blast putting my story out there in such an open way and sharing myself through poems and essays in different books, and I'm sure I will have more memoir coming in the future, but I'm really excited and ready to write that science fiction and have fun. And well, I like to have a lot of heartbreak in my stories, no lie, but have a lot of fun creating and weaving stories that ultimately have these positive messages in the end and teach us something hopefully about ourselves. So, thank you for tuning into this. Thank you for your support in the book, and again, go check out the soundtrack if you like to listen to music. It's got just a fun wide variety of songs with meaningful lyrics or emotional moments in my life. Just I might write a blog series. So if you resonate with a particular song, let me know. If you want to learn more about my perspectives with the songs, let me know. So happy to share. And of course, the poetry collection is out now. Thank you for your support. Thank you for cheering me on. And know that I believe in the power of your story and your words and your message that you have to share with the collective, whether that be through writing or through painting or through gardening or through volunteering in your local community. I believe in you and your mission and your purpose and your inherent worth and value. And I am always cheering